Welcome to Young Money with Tracy Bissett, the advice show for young millionaires in the making. It's time for some $1 Million Straight Talk with Tracy, President and Chief Financial Fitness Trainer at Bissett Financial Fitness. Each week, Tracy's going to tell you what you need to know now at the beginning of your earning curve. Basic and advanced financial concepts made clear, healthy money habits and the missteps to avoid, and all the stuff that you can do to set yourself up for a future of fantastic financial freedom. Ready to lace up and start this week's financial fitness training? Let's do it, Tracy.
Welcome to the Young Money Podcast. I'm really delighted today we have a very good guest, Olga Kirshenbaum. Welcome to the show, Olga.
Thanks for having me, Tracy. It's great to be on.
So Olga is a published author of Shmoney Guide, Making Money Choices Doesn't Need to Be So Scary, focusing on personal finance advice. She is a money whisperer and founder of Rags to Riches Consulting. Olga empowers individuals and creative leaders to make money choices with confidence so they can unleash life's full potential. So welcome again, Olga.
Thanks so much.
So now that I've read your formal bio, I would love it if you can share in your own words what it is that you do every day and how you help the people that are your clients.
Sure. So I usually work with two groups of people, either individuals or small business owners or entrepreneurs that tend to be in creative industries. So when it comes to the individual work I do, it's typically helping people get their budgets in order, figure out how to stop themselves from living paycheck to paycheck. And sometimes it's people that have never budgeted before, so they really need that guidance because what I'm realizing, it sounds like almost no one really has been taught how to do a budget or how to even manage their money. So I kind of provide that assistance, the personal finance side. And then when I work with small business owners and entrepreneurs, typically it's people who are in creative fields. So I have a background in advertising, visual effects, film production. I've kind of learned how to explain money topics to people who tend to think money is not my thing. I don't do numbers. My brain just doesn't work like that. And I spent 10 years working with people who are creative and explaining money to them. And I found that it's kind of my niche to explain these concepts to creative entrepreneurs. So that's what I tend to do. But that work is much more varied than the work that I do with individuals because it tends to be based on where the person is coming from and how much business background they have. So sometimes I work with people who are great in what they do. They're very talented, but they just don't know anything about not just finance, but managing a business in general. So sometimes it's really helping them understand what is the purpose of the money function in their business altogether. Because a lot of the time they think that I have to become an accountant overnight, and I help them kind of make that fear a power so that they can use their skills, manage that accounting and the money side of business, and then really focus on what they're really brilliant at.
I couldn't agree more. Certainly when I work with entrepreneurs as well, I know that they've started their business because they're so passionate and they have such a skill in what they do, but not necessarily have they had any business training, let alone financial management training. And so what you're saying, it totally resonates with me.
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm also starting to see an overlap between the personal finance side of things, and especially with entrepreneurs that don't have a business background. And I kind of saw this when I was working as an accountant in companies, is we tend to assume that people know these things. And I know I took it for granted, having gone to business school and taken accounting classes. Everyone just knows this stuff, right? And
not so much.
Exactly. And what I'm starting to realize is that a lot of the people actually bring their personal finance issues into how they manage their money on the business side. So for example, I started to think, someone who's maybe on paper making decent money, but they aren't able to manage it correctly and they don't understand how to manage the cash flow. All of a sudden, they get promoted in their business and they have a budget of $200,000 that they have to manage every year. They don't know what that means. And really, it may be more money than they can imagine. And they take a lot of the times that I work with people, they come from a survival and a scarcity mindset, and they apply that to the business. And a lot of the time, people don't even notice this happen because that's just what they're used to.
For sure. And I certainly have seen that too. Now, switching gears a little bit, you've had such a successful career to date, lots of varied experiences. When you think about all that success, how did you get there? And what would you say are some key themes that have showed up either in yourself or you've developed to help you achieve that success?
Oh, thank you so much. I think for me personally, I'm an immigrant. So my parents came here from Russia when I was 9 years old. So for me, I think a lot of that drive that I had that pushed me to just keep doing things had to do with that. I was the first kid to go to college in America. It was kind of I felt like there's a lot of responsibility on my shoulders to kind of prove that, we're making it. And I am starting to also realize I've had some conversations with mindset coaches and life coaches recently that have made me realize that I was never really truly challenged when I was in school. Like there were maybe concepts that I had more difficulty understanding, but I never really felt challenged. And I have always been an eager learner. And I think I'm starting to realize now that as time went on, the best way that I could challenge myself or find challenges in my life was to continue pushing myself. And it's something I realized I also picked up from my dad when I was little. I remember him writing down goals for, let's say, the next 5 years, things he wants to achieve. And I always admired that. And I don't know if I realized that equated to him getting his things accomplished. But I definitely picked that up, and I actually have a notebook that I still look at once in a while. It's from when I was still in college, and it literally just like lists out all of my to-dos. And that's been a big thing for me. I always have a to-do list. I always have goals. I try to check in with myself very often. I tend to be self-aware, so I try to kind of check myself very often to see if I'm still on the track that will get me to my goals. Because I think a lot of the time it's so easy to, you're in the weeds on the battlefield and you don't see the full picture. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up and lose sight of things. So that, especially now that I'm an entrepreneur, it really does help me to stay on track. So I'd say those things are the ones that kept me going for the last couple of years.
Well, that's fantastic. And certainly anybody who's listening, if you adopt one or all of these, would put you in good stead. So what I heard is about being goal oriented, being organized, having that drive and hustle, certainly being self-aware so you can course correct if you're going away from your goals. And finally, that you're always challenging yourself. You're not content to just kind of stick with the status quo, think that you've made it to this point and just kind of wait and see what happens and just not continue to improve yourself. So I think all of those are extremely practical. They're very common when we talk to successful people. And I think, as I said, anybody who's listening who adopts one or all of these will certainly be able to achieve success as well.
Absolutely.
Now, because you do have a numbers background and you do know quite a bit about money, I'm curious, though, if there's ever been a big turning point in your life from a financial perspective or something that you'd wish you'd known a little bit early on in your life.
I actually have a two-parter answer for this. So for me, the first big turning point was when I got fired from my first job. So I guess I was lucky enough for the first 10 years of my career never to have experienced being fired. And I was always a high performer. So being fired from a job, and it's important to note, I was also very unhappy there. So let's say I got fired on a Monday, Wednesday, I already had an interview planned like the week before.
Oh, wow.
So I was out the door anyway. It was just basically they got to it before I did. But because I was so unhappy there, it actually, it really shook me. Not kind of, like a lot. It really made me think that if a company that I don't really value that much anymore, they would let me go, that maybe there was something wrong with me. And that really shook my confidence. And I don't think I've ever felt that in my career before. But as I was going through those emotions, I've never been fired before. So I knew that I was eligible for unemployment. I went through that process. And that was really my first eye-opening experience into quote unquote real life, to find out how much unemployment you get per week in New York State and in New York City as one of the most expensive cities in America was shocking. It's $360 or something per week, and that's after taxes. And my rent alone at the time was $1,200. So for me, coming from an accounting background and being savvy with money, I had always saved. I always put away for a rainy day. And it wasn't impacting me immediately, but it made me think. I was living with roommates. I was independent. I don't have children. I don't have that many responsibilities that most people have. And it really made me think, what if I was a single mom with 2 children? Childcare in New York City also super expensive. I mean, childcare in general is really expensive. But it made me think, how would a person would survive going through this experience had they not been me? Now, last year, when our government shut down, we found out eye-opening statistics. So I think 60% of government employees wiped out all of their savings. Americans, for the most part, are living paycheck to paycheck. Again, about 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck these days. So imagine a person like this living in the most expensive city in America, or one of the most, and going through that experience. That for me really, I would say, propelled me to start Rags to Riches Consulting, because I've always seen this happen. And I've also realized that when I went to school for accounting, one of my background goals, so to speak, was find out, why is it that companies are always seemingly doing well and people are struggling? And what I found out was that it's budgets. Most people don't budget. So statistically, they say 40% of Americans are budgeting today. And I think it's not a coincidence that 40% of those people actually have $1,000 in their savings to cover an emergency, and 60% don't. So for me, the first part was having this experience and realizing how little people have in safety nets.
Mm-hmm.
And then really getting my MBA. School is really expensive in New York City, just in America, really. I have $140,000 in student debt. For me, I felt like I originally went back to school because I thought I wanted my CPA license, and I would have had to go back to school to complete my education requirement. And I ended up getting my MBA in entrepreneurship, and then I decided to not do my CPA. But I'm very glad that I ended up finding something, one, that I enjoyed, that I could concentrate on, and also apply it afterwards. Because I know so many people, I actually know someone who went to school, and this is undergrad, not even graduate school, $150,000 for a degree she will never use. So going through these experiences, really, one, I wish I knew that sometimes school isn't the right thing to do. I think we have a lot of societal programming to say, like, you have to do these things. And I kind of followed that for a little bit in my 20s, and I wish I didn't. And then just to know that how important budgets are, I would have probably been spreading this message 10 years ago instead of waiting.
Well, that's a really great illustration you given us. I can really visualize it because of the stories and personal information you shared. A couple things I just want to relate so that if there's Canadian listeners listening. So when you were talking about 60% of the government employees wiped out their savings, 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. We're pretty close to that in Canada. We're right around 50%. We know that if people's paychecks were delayed for even 1 week, they couldn't pay their bills because they don't have that emergency fund savings. And certainly you guys have what I would call an epidemic in terms of the issue around student debt levels in the US. We certainly have high levels here, but not quite to that degree because it is a little bit cheaper. Our students are coming out generally with around 25 to 30,000 in debt from an undergrad. So just to give those comparable stats. I love what you said about the lesson that maybe not following the path and that kind of being programmed to go on to school. I was talking to another guest on the show lately, Suzanne Tyson, and she was certainly saying one of the things you've got to focus on now when you're deciding if you're going to go to post-secondary is how much is it going to cost you? Are you going to like it? Are you going to be able to get a job that's going to allow you to pay it back? And so it's not just go to school, do whatever you want, and then things will work out because the cost is just too high nowadays. So I really like that you gave that piece of advice, which was excellent.
Absolutely. And I would say even to explore more what you're passionate about and taking that, if you want to go back to school, I would say that I think I was fortunate. I always loved accounting. There's something just strange about my brain. Accounting, money, everything is riveting to me. But
I'm like that too. And I like how it can be black and white, but it also
exactly.
can be gray. It can also be gray. And there's also many solutions to problems.
Absolutely. But I would say take what you're passionate about and lead with that. I think that is probably another thing I would tell myself in my 20s. I kind of put that on the back burner, and I feel very fortunate that I found my way back, and somehow everything that I've done does apply to what I'm doing today. But again, when people don't really have any intentions and a reason and understanding why they're doing what they're doing, they can end up with $150,000 in student debt that they're not going to be using the degree for anything. And that's really the scary part, because in America, and I'd love to hear your insights on how it works in Canada, but let's say you file for bankruptcy in America, you can't get rid of your student loans. That is on your name forever.
Yeah, certainly very similar. I don't know the complete ins and outs around it, but it's not going away. There's a certain time period where it stays with you, and then you can make some arrangements depending if it's a government or financial institution loan. So it's not a decision to be taken lightly to take on that much debt in the first place.
Absolutely.
Now, because of all of the things that factored into your life, all your course of study, your passion and everything, I know that that kind of led you to want to work with individuals as well as the small business owners. And then it led you to create your book, The Shmoney Guide, Making Money Choices Doesn't Have to Be So Scary. So I'd love it if you can share with us the inspiration that propelled you to write the book.
Oh, absolutely. So I actually focused for the first year of my business solely on individuals. I just wanted to make sure I got that up and running. I knew I'd be working with businesses eventually, but I wanted to work all of that out and have that process set up. And in the first 6 months, I had a lot of feedback and was able to rework not just my content in the sense of what I'm teaching people, but also my content marketing. And it really started resonating with people once I figured out where the pain points were. And I actually was thinking about this as I was building the curriculum that I teach. I knew that I eventually wanted to write a book, and it would be basically my sessions boiled down into a book. And then I started talking to people who were reaching out to me that truly could not afford my sessions. And I do give sessions back every month, but the volume of people that were reaching out to me was just beyond my capacity to help. And I found myself going to sleep at night and thinking about these people. I typically don't ask for people's budgets. A lot of what I do is just truly empowering people and making them feel confident to make these choices. Obviously, if they want me to look at their spreadsheet or talk something through with them, I'm happy to do that. Most of the time, they tend to actually do everything on their own. I just get them past that fear. But some of them would send me their budgets and I could see just how little they're working with. And again, it wasn't people like me that have less responsibilities. It's single moms, it's fathers who are the basically sole providers for their families. And literally 1 week of sickness, one emergency could set them back so much. They truly can't afford me. And I would stay up thinking about them. And then one morning I said, you know what? Why wait for like a publishing deal or get the right time? Just start doing it now. And I had a lot of people saying on LinkedIn that I should take my posts and do something with them and write a book. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I should. And I started outlining it. And I think around March, there was another person that reached out to me and it just broke my heart because I really want to help. And I was just already at capacity for the stuff I volunteer. And I was like, you know what? Now you're going to have an hour every day on your calendar and it is your writing block. You're going to make sure to get this done. And that's really what started it.
I think that's fantastic. And at the time we're recording this, it's November in Canada and it's our financial literacy month. And the theme this year is to take charge of your finances. And so in your way, you created this book to help anyone who wants to have the tools and the guidance to be able to take charge of their finances, which I think is phenomenal. So congratulations. And thank you for caring about other people who are out there who need help but maybe can't afford it, because I believe it. Financial education, financial literacy, or financial fitness, as I call it, it's a fundamental life skill. And so you're really at a disadvantage if you don't have the opportunity to learn that skill.
Absolutely. The other day I had a client describe to me how she's feeling now that she's going through these changes. And she said, it's like I was walking around with clenched fists and I didn't even know it. And now I'm starting to finally let go. And she realizes how much tension there really was. And unfortunately, that is actually how most people feel when it comes to any sort of money stress. We all kind of say this is how it is, and we endure so much. And it's something that we've been doing kind of all of our lives. I've even realized some of my money blocks as I've been learning how to coach my clients better. And we take for granted how heavy that stress really is. I think the 2008 American Psychology Association said that as of last year, money stress is one of top 3 stressors of all adults and even children. And that's
For
crazy
sure.
to me because, I remember my parents talking about money. I know my mom would say we have a budget, but again, we were immigrants, so we had a little bit of a different situation. My mom was pretty open about money to begin with, but it's really scary how, every time I think about the struggles that people are going through and they don't even realize it, I just want to give my book to them and just say, please read it. It's not that long. It will give you a peace of mind. And that's what I feel like I'm doing for people. It's more than just budgeting. Like budgeting is great. Knowing what's going on with your money, that's great. But what I love is when they realize, again, it doesn't have to be so scary. It actually can be fun.
For sure. And you mentioned a couple things when you were talking earlier. You mentioned around your mindset, that a lot of your clients come from a place of scarcity. You also mentioned that you were getting through some of your money blocks. And so the way that we are raised, the way that we think about money, it's all kind of programmed when we're pretty young. And so for those listening, I'm going to link up an episode in the show notes, earlier episode on Young Money, where we talk about money mindset, how to figure out what yours is, and then if it's not what you want it to be, steps you can take to change it. Because I really want to get Olga talking now about what success strategies that you have in your book that can really help the young millionaires in the making who are listening today.
Sure. So one of my biggest things is pay yourself first. That is one of the reasons why people don't have savings. They always think I'll do it later, but it's always like tomorrow. Tomorrow never comes, right?
For those listening who might not know what that means, can you elaborate a little bit?
Sure. So whenever we say, oh, I'll do this thing tomorrow, why not do it today? I believe that whenever we procrastinate, the chances of us getting to it are just so much less than getting it done. For example, I'm also starting a podcast, and I just kept saying 2020, 2020, I'm going to do it eventually. But then I was talking to people who are doing podcasts, and they're like, why? Like, tell me an exact reason why you're holding off on it. And nothing that I said was an actual reason. It was just a list of excuses. So basically, I tell people, funnel your money out wherever it needs to go the day you get paid. When you do that, whatever is left in your checking account, it's going to be your spending cash. Knowing that you have $300 until your next paycheck is already some sort of anchor. The problem that I find these days is that most people, and also the people are finding an issue with this, it's getting harder to budget and track your expenses because we're moving towards this cashless world. Everyone has credit cards. And one of the reasons why people aren't 100% sure what's going on with their money is that they're using their bank balance to say, that's how much money I have. But they're not taking into account, oh, I have these 2-3 credit cards that I have balances on. And if you already have those balances on there, that money is spent and it is due, whether the statement's not closed or not closing for another 2 weeks. They think that they have more money than they do. So whenever you pay yourself first, you are able to really see what's happening. And also, I teach people how to kind of do everything the way I was taught in accounting when I was in school. We didn't use any software in the beginning. You literally just learned the foundation. You figured out how the theory of it works. And once you see it work on paper, you begin to realize how you can make it work in an automated system. So I haven't tested this because most people that I work with today actually just don't budget at all. I have a feeling a lot of people that do struggle with getting their process with budgeting automated, they struggle because they don't fully grasp how it fully works. And the automating without fully understanding how it's working doesn't allow you to set up the processes the way you really need them to work. Does that make sense?
For sure. And so what I heard is make sure you're paying yourself first. Go old school, use pen and paper to do it first. Then once you're sure you understand, automate anything that you want to do. And really just your reiteration of the importance of the budget and that you do need to make one to really get a handle on what's going on.
And I'd love to tell you a little story about a client that I had talked to just recently. I run a money mastermind called the Shmoney Academy, sort of like a offshoot from my book. Mm-hmm. And one of the women has never budgeted before. She was kind of beating herself down. You know, I should know these things and I should know better. One of the first things I teach them is how to actually put that budget together. She finally does. And on our next call, it was an 180-degree transformation. She went from beating herself down and all this negative talk about herself and her abilities to budget and not being able to get it done to saying how great she's doing. She was walking around thinking that she wasn't making enough money, that she was actually in the red every month. And this was an assumption she was making. She was like, oh my goodness, I actually make enough money. This is already great. Then she realized I actually have the money to start paying off these credit cards that I have balances on. Now she's not only paying those back, she's going to be paying two of them in a matter of weeks. And then she's going to set herself up with the Dave Ramsey debt snowball repayment plan that I like to favor because you can see your progress easier, but she's actually excited about it. She's not even asking me like, what do I need to do next? She's doing it herself. And that is the power of a budget. What I like to say is your money goals are your maps. It's where you want to go, your destination. And your budget is actually your compass. It allows you to see where you are today and where you need to pivot and how to get yourself to that destination that you really want to reach.
I love that. The money goals are your maps and the budget is your compass. I think that makes it really crystal clear for us all to visualize. Now, you've talked about a lot of things that can help, and that success story that you shared is wonderful, and that's what we want everyone to experience. What missteps do you see out there, or things that people are doing or not doing that are really hurting their ability to move forward and take control of their financial futures?
There's actually a couple of things. One big thing for me is money talk stigma. So most of us have grown up with this idea of it's not polite to talk about money. You don't bring money up. I think it's one of those three things that we don't talk about, right? Politics, religion, and money. And I have found that because of this, most of us believe that everyone else has got it right and knows what they're doing except us. And that's one of the reasons why I started the Shmoney Academy, actually, because it's a group learning group and they get to talk about their money feelings and stresses together. And yes, I'm there to guide them and facilitate the group discussions. But what I really want them to see is that, one, we're all in this together. We don't all know everything. Even I don't know everything. I have gotten on calls with people who are either finance people or money coaches as well. And I've learned so much from them. So we have this belief that everyone knows what's happening except us. And then we beat ourselves down and then we say, we're not doing these things. And this negative self-talk, one, makes it less likely that we'll face those fears because now we're talking them up to be these tiny little fears that over time grow into these monsters and they become super scary. I believe that when we don't talk about things, that's what happens. Something that is affecting us negatively can become this out of control thing that begins to control you. The other thing is because, and I think it relates to this money talk stigma, when we are going through financial setbacks, and sometimes it's out of our control. Maybe like me, I got fired. Sometimes people end up in the hospital and in America, we also have a poor medical insurance situation. So there's tons of people that end up in the hospital. They get the help they need, but then they end up with $15,000 in medical bills that they can't pay right away. And I get it. It's embarrassing sometimes to go to someone and say, hey, I don't have $15,000 to pay this all off. Can we come up with a payment plan? But I find whenever you bring up a payment plan, people actually react to you with more compassion. I'll talk about a study. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I think you'll understand why I'm talking about it. There's a study in New York City in the 70s. This guy was a psychologist. His mom comes home one day and she says, people in New York City are so rude. I'm an older woman standing on the train and not one person let me have their seat. And he says to his mom, did you actually ask? And she says, well, no. They should just know better, right? So he was actually a professor in a school in New York City. I forget which college, but he decided to have a little experiment to test, are New Yorkers really that rude on the train? So he asked his students, let's say every week you're on the train, you need to ask at least 10 people for a seat and see what happens and just take notes. And there was actually a surprising outcome of this study. It ended up being more focused on the actual people asking for the seats. They found that it actually affected them so much that 30 years later, when they followed up with everyone who was in the study, they still remember the fear they had of asking people for help. One woman actually said, every time I think about asking for a seat on the train that I had to do 30 years ago, I already feel myself feeling sick, like I feel nauseous. So the reason why I say this story is that we always tell people to ask for help, but we underestimate how difficult it is. And I think that study really illustrates that. So when we are going through financial setbacks, it's okay to call up your credit card company and say, hey, I'm going through a tough time. And the reason why it's important to do it earlier on is because before you're delinquent, they can actually have programs that you may not be aware of that can get you through this tough time. But once you're in collections and once you've ignored them for 6 months, it's not that they're not going to be able to help you at that point, but it's just going to be less available to you. Same thing goes when you have student loans. The reality is, yes, they're tough conversations to have, especially when you're not doing well. But these people at the end of the day, they all just have a job. They want to collect money for the companies they work for. And most of the time, they're just people on the other line. You will probably receive more compassion than you even realize when you have those conversations with these people. So I think the second one is maybe even bigger than the money talk stigma, is that actually asking for help. I know it can be very difficult, but asking for it is so important because you never know what's out there and how people can help.
I love that. And certainly I see that regularly. I teach part-time at a college in a financial services program, and I'm always advocating to my students to, you're not understanding a class, you're not understanding, a lot of them are new to Canada, how things are working here. Ask questions. And it is very hard to ask, but certainly it goes along with money too. But I think most people will be pleasantly surprised that when you do put it out there and you ask for help, the majority of people are going to say yes and try to help you in some way.
Absolutely. And I would say if you're not sure what to say, get a script. I know it sounds silly, but if you have it written down in front of you on a piece of paper and you're calling up a creditor, just say like, hi, my name is Olga. I lost my job. I know I have this money to pay, but is there anything that we can do to get me through this tough period?
And I bet if you Google something like that, Google will provide it too. We can find everything there.
And I also have a blog post where I have a script that people can it's kind of a generic thing that they can go off of. And I can share that with you if you like.
Excellent. Yeah, that we can put that in the show notes. I think that'd be very helpful for everybody who's listening, just to give you that boost of confidence so that you don't have to come up with the words. You just have to say them.
Absolutely.
Or put them in an email. But as you mentioned, it's very important to communicate early before you're in delinquent or you have any trouble. And I know in my experience as a lender, there's way more solutions and possible fixes to a problem before it happens than once it's occurred. There are still always solutions, but there's a lot more options beforehand.
Yes. But I also do want to say, if you have been delinquent, I've also worked with people who haven't talked to their creditors in years. They just are scared of picking up their phone. They're getting nonstop calls from creditors, and they are at a point where they're ready to talk to someone. But now they have this fear. I've been avoiding them for so many days, so many months. How am I going to start this conversation with them? So what I like to tell people, unfortunately, it's the one thing I don't have the statistics for. But if you know anyone, or if anyone is listening and knows these statistics, I would love to hear them. I would say that most people that work for collection companies or doing collections calls, they, one, either don't get to talk to someone. Two, they're probably getting poor treatment because people are talking to them in typically hard situations, tough situations. It's high stress, and they're probably getting yelled at. If you have a script and you call back, or you pick up the phone and say, I know I have been bad and this hasn't been ideal, but I just really want to move forward, that will probably make that person's day, and they would be so happy to speak to you. So even if you haven't been talking to your creditors or collectors, I would say get that script going and give it a try, because I would even bet money on it that they would probably be ecstatic to hear from you.
Yeah, I think it's never too late. There's always the opportunity to ask for help. And when people do that, there's certainly a willingness to try to work within the system. And sometimes people are able to make some exceptions depending on the situation. So it's been so great talking to you today. Before I let you go, I'd love it if you can share if there's any final pieces of advice or anything that you've already mentioned that you just want to reiterate to make sure all of the listeners have taken it in.
Absolutely. I would love to leave you guys with this idea. People like to think that money is a finite thing, that there's a limit to it. And I don't actually buy into that. I don't think economies would exist if there was a limited amount of money in the world. And once you have a shift in perspective about money and realize that it's not the scary thing, it's not a limited amount out there, in my eyes, it becomes sort of, one, a tool to use to get to where you're going. And two, it's more energy. And when you think about it as something almost like air that we need to survive, but you don't have to make it so demonized, it actually becomes like a friendly thing for you to deal with, as opposed to something that you're dreading every month.
I love that. And certainly it's so true. Use it to accomplish the things that you want to do, but don't make it control your life.
Absolutely.
Now, after all the wonderful stories you've shared with us, I'm sure some listeners are wondering how they can reach out to you, and they're probably curious about what you're working on next. So if you could share both of those with us, that would be fantastic.
Sure. The two best places to reach me is on LinkedIn, and also my email, which is Olga, OLGA, at ragstorichesconsulting.com. And I am actually starting a new Shmoney Academy group. So the first one is wrapping up in the next couple of weeks. And I will be accepting new students for start date this week of December 9th. So that's my next project. And of course, my podcast.
Super. Do you have a name yet for the podcast?
I do. It's actually called 9 Minutes of Creative Wisdom. It's a little bit of a change of pace for what I normally do. Basically, it is to talk to creative leaders out there who can share their creative genius with my audience, but also to kind of start money conversations with. One of my questions is, I hear from most creatives that they avoid money like the plague. What are your thoughts on that? Just to kind of start seeing what people's ideas are out there on a bigger scale.
Well, I definitely have some potential guests for you, so I will send them your way.
Oh, that would be awesome, Tracy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Olga, for joining us today. You've shared so much, so I really appreciate you joining us. In terms of the things that I'm taking away, really loved all of the key success factors that you talked about, having that goal orientation, being organized, the drive and self-aware, and really pushing yourself to the next challenge. You shared some great success strategies like going old school, using pen and paper to make sure you're understanding the concepts, and really the misstep about avoiding talking about money and the avoidance of asking for help. So I think big theme here is to start talking more about money, and then when you need it, to certainly ask for help. And really love the final thought that you left with us around money being a tool and that you can use it to accomplish what you want to. It doesn't need to control you.
That's a great summary. Thank you.
Well, you are welcome. So there you have it, listeners. Olga Kirshenbaum, published author of the Shmoney Guide, Making Money Choices Doesn't Need to Be So Scary, and certainly an empowering money coach for individuals and creative leaders so they can make financial choices with confidence. So until next time, take good care and stay financially fit.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. To all you millionaires in the making out there, if you love this podcast, please subscribe on iTunes to keep your financial fitness training going. Oh, and leave us a review. And be sure to visit 2 S's, 2 T's, financialfitness.com to take your free financial fitness assessment. Find out how financially fit you really are. See you next week, young millionaires to be.